Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to a brand new episode of Transformation Talks. I'm Yasmin Taj, editor, ETHR World International and head branded content at the Economic Times. It is such a pleasure to meet you all once again. For those of you who are new to Transformation Talks, as part of this LinkedIn Live talk show series, I host global leaders and HR tech influencers from around the globe and urge them to share their experiences from the new world of work that we are all part of through transformation stories about talent, technology, culture, and more. And today it gives me immense pleasure to introduce one of the world's most influential management thinkers, Fons Trompenaars. Fons is a Dutch organizational theorist and founder and director of intercultural management consultancy, Trompenaars Hampden-Turner. He is recognized around the world for his work as a consultant, trainer, motivational speaker, and author of various books on all subjects of culture and business. He has spent over 30 years helping Fortune 500 leaders manage and solve their business and cultural dilemmas to increase global effectiveness and performance, particularly in the areas of leadership, innovation, globalization, intercultural understanding, and managing culture change by reconciling different ethnic, gender, or generation-based professional, organizational, etc. Fons has translated his approach into innovative, practical, and profitable results in all areas of international business. Welcome, Fons. It is such a pleasure to host you today.
Thank you, Yasmin. What a nice start.
Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to some great insights from you. I'm sure there's so much to learn from you. So I'll jump into the first question right away. But before that, I'd like to tell all our audience members joining this session, do not forget to post your reflections, views, and comments in the comments section here. Let's keep it very interactive. So Fons, the world of work is now getting back to normal, as we say, but the COVID era has been an eye-opener for many of us. And those learnings are still worth keeping. What have been your primary takeaways from the crisis?
Yeah, we have done some research because we could not do our famous face-to-face interactions where we did keynotes and we did workshops. And so we said, why don't we do a piece of research on this? And what we have found in the international research on how we dealt with COVID is that nations and later also organizations within those nations were doing it quite differently. And we, as we normally do, we post it as dilemmas. So the meta dilemma of COVID-19 was, amongst other things, but really the one that hit us in the face was the dilemma, do we go for the economy or do we go for health? And you saw that nations that went for the economy had an enormous health problem. Brazil and the US are good examples. I know there are nations that went for health at the cost of the economy. And recently there was China, where, you know, the consequences still have to be seen. But there were also nations that have reconciled the dilemma. And I'll give you some examples in a second, but can you ask the right question, namely, what could we do with the economy that helps us to solve the health issues? And what can we do with the health issues that helps us on the economic side? And so that meta dilemma was dealt with better by some nations and organizations than others. Let me give you an example of an organization that did that, at least as an experiment, very well. G-Star, you know, the denim company, which has Dutch roots, by the way, launched a very fashionable face mask. And that was sold for 60 euros, $70. And they sold out within a weekend. They sold 100,000 pieces in a weekend.
Wow.
And what I'm trying to say is if you combine the health issue with the economic issue, you're in great shape. Now, later on, many other companies followed, but it's a little example where we have found that the meta dilemma of health and economy, if you do it well, is better resolved. Then there were other dilemmas like individual freedom and group solidarity, right? If you go for individual freedom, you're in deep trouble. If you go for group solidarity, you're in deep trouble. But if you combine the two, you're in great shape. Now, I could list some other dilemmas, but what we have particularly learned, I think, in the COVID-19 pandemic is that not everything is controllable. We, especially your generation, Yasmin, rather than mine, are born and raised in an environment where, you know, you could control a lot. Even the time when you got children and a career and this and that. And by the way, I'm not blaming anything. It's where we are raised in post-war. Now I'm post-war too, but we were having a lot of scarcity in the 50s and 60s. And I was born in the 50s. But the generation now is suddenly facing an environment where they say, gee, I'm not in control. It's a pandemic coming over us. There is no medicine. The only thing we can do is try not to get it. That idea of not being in control is an enormous learning point that I think we should take to our heart and say, hey, are there ways by going with the flow, we can control things better, and by controlling things better, we go with the flow. I hope that will remain, and that might lead us to another discussion, namely, are there fundamental revolutions going on?
Exactly. Great, Fons, such great points there. I think what I take away from this particular response from you was how do we find opportunity in a crisis, right? When there's a crisis happening, how do you kind of reconcile the word that you used, the negatives? There are two dilemmas you're mentioning, but how can you reconcile them, bring them together and create a cycle that one leads to the other and helps enable and, you know, solve the other issue? Now, that's a very interesting point. As you said, if you look at things in silo, you will not be able to solve issues. But if you
exactly
look together, yeah.
Exactly, because the worst you can do in a dilemma is to make a choice.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because there is nothing against individual freedom and there is nothing against group solidarity, but they bite.
Exactly.
And making a choice like economy or health is not helping.
Exactly.
Because you might lose the other side. We need another way of thinking.
Yes, exactly. Another way of thinking. And I think this is a huge lesson, I think, for countries, for nations, for organizations, because as you said, a lot of them missed out and lost this entire, you know, opportunity because they could not figure out how to bring these two together. Yeah.
Well summarized.
Yes, great. Thanks, Fons. Fons, coming to how in the past, since the advent of COVID, there have been tons of research and reports that say that organization culture has considerably improved. And we can practically see how HR and business leaders, their agendas are being redesigned. And needless to mention that employee checklists to stick to their employers or potential employers are also changing at the same time. What are your thoughts on this revolution? How have things changed organizationally?
I think the agility in many ways have enormously improved. I'm in London babysitting for my grandson who is in London, and there were rail strikes. I was looking at the newspaper, but and the rail strikes, including the subway, was on Tuesday, Thursday, and this Saturday. And what I found in the newspaper is that 80% of the people stayed home and worked from home. Can you imagine before Corona, there would be a mess, there would be congestions, there would be, now I'm not saying it's a mess, but it's always a mess in London. But what I'm trying to say is that agility, namely combining on the spot, working from home with working face-to-face with colleagues in the office, is solved within a second. And I think that is great, that agile culture, employers and employees understanding each other. Yes, better to stay home. And by the way, a lot of research has shown that working at home doesn't mean a lack of productivity. Now, it depends obviously on the personal situation. I now know, having small children, I don't, but it's grandchildren. My God, it's difficult to work from home. Uh, so it's not easy for everyone. But if I would be at home with no grandchildren, my children are out of the house, it's easy and it's very productive. In fact, what we found in our own office is that not only the agility, but also the structural approach to mix a bit working from home and working from the office is great. And I don't think, and let me speak for myself for the moment, although I think a lot of research proves that, is that the combination is not hurting or even helping. It might even help productivity. In our case, where there's a lot of research and thinking, and let's call it thinking, it's great to do it from home.
Yes.
Because in the office, you're just disturbed in that process.
Yes.
On the other hand, you need to share your ideas with people around you. Now, there is research, and it was a Harvard Business Review article, that brainstorming through Zoom leads to more productivity in the end result than face-to-face brainstorming. While the normal idea is that brainstorming, you should be in a room and writing on boards. Now, apparently, hierarchy goes away because, we all have the same size of the screen. And when one is talking, the others should not. While if you're face to face, the boss, his or her idea, it's a bit better because it's the boss. While in Zoom or in Teams, that disappears, and etc. etc. So that is one example. Agility of combining face to face with more digital approaches. But there are other things in organizational culture. We were talking about hierarchy. I personally think that new leadership styles do emerge. And one of them is what we call servant leadership, enabling others to perform better. And that mindset has grown, that collective mindset has grown quite fundamentally over the crisis. And finally, I would say, in view of the question you asked, the improvement of organizational culture, hierarchy is important. Ways of communicating have been, I don't say improved, but enriched. What we have realized is you cannot solve everything digitally.
No.
But neither face to face. There are things that are so much easier on the internet than face to face. And I gave an example, doing research or, writing a serious article or email is done better in isolation. While other things, you need face to face. You need to share with people that are around the table, having lunch together, and et cetera, et cetera. So the enrichment of communication, let me give you an example. In my own sphere, when I do keynotes now on Zoom, which is obviously the need for being more interactive, because if it's 1 hour, people, to attract their attention for a long time is very difficult. Exactly. So you use the chat box, you use the polling, and you do one punch on the button and they go into subgroups.
Yes.
That is great. Well, if you do a face-to-face keynote, to get them, oh, by the way, you need to be in room 22 and please be back in 20 minutes. It's over. So the point I'm trying to make, some things we have found out in the improved communication is that there are things that go much easier digitally and things that are going much better face-to-face.
Absolutely. And I think what we are looking for as organizations and as employees is a combination, the right balance basically of face-to-face and technology-driven interactions. That's going to be very important in the future. As you very rightly said, organizations have learned how to be more agile. They have transformed themselves as to the changing needs, not only of the economy or of the world overall, but of even of the changing needs of the employees, because employees are asking for more flexibility. They want more me time. They want their well-being to be taken care of, right? So I think agility is very, very important in building that organizational culture, as you very rightly pointed out. And organizations who are being able to do that, who've done that in the recent past, are the ones who are now at the forefront of this entire change and transformation that the world has seen. So very great points, Fons. Thanks so much for sharing that. Coming to another very important topic that has been widely discussed these days about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has found a newfound importance in the new world of work. So, Fons, how, according to you, has this importance evolved recently? And also taking notes from Charles Hampden-Turner and your 7 dimensions of national cultural differences model, what does the future of workplace culture and inclusion look like?
It's a very deep question. First of all, out of our experience, we see that categorizing people into the box of national culture is fading away a bit. We now get a diversity of diversity. Let me explain. I live in Amsterdam, normally speaking, and about 20 years ago, 16% of people in Amsterdam didn't have Dutch parents. Today, it's 56%. Now, I'm now in London. It's difficult to hear English. When you walk on the streets, you hear Spanish, you hear Arabic, you hear all kinds of languages. This is a new world. So globalization is around the corner. You don't have to take a plane to go to other cultures. You need really to just look around, be open to it. That's one. The other thing that has happened in the workplace, there are more females in senior positions. By the way, we're not there yet. I have three daughters, Yasmin, so there's still a lot of work to do.
Yes.
But let's say participation of females compared to males has improved. Thirdly, young people have much more to say in the game of business than in the past because of digitalization.
Yes.
Now, if I ask you, if you have a young American female talking to an older senior Indian male, what is causing the problem? What is causing the misunderstanding? And the problem is you cannot solve it by putting people into boxes. Oh, it's because he is from India and she is from America. No, because the role of gender in different cultures is already defined differently.
Exactly.
And on top of that, young versus older. So what we say, diversity and inclusion cannot be like in the beginnings. You remember the workshops in America in particular. We have now a gender workshop. Yeah, and then we have a generational workshop. And then we have a sexual orientation workshop. And then we have Fons is coming for national culture, right? And we say, gee, but how can you be more effective with that multiculturalism in diversity? It is the diversity of diversity. So the answer to that is, what is your issue? And I don't care by what it's caused. So what we are now doing is running workshops on the dilemmas, our challenges we call dilemmas, which is defined as two desirable alternatives that are fighting each other.
Okay.
So a dilemma is not a negative versus a positive. A dilemma is you want to standardize globally because of economies of scale, and you want to be close to the customer and be flexible, in other words, being more local. Both are okay, but they bite each other. right? Because if you standardize, you might not be flexible.
Yeah.
And if you're flexible, you lose economies of scale, right? So the point I'm trying to make is start with the issue that you call a dilemma, and then explain that different groups have different approaches. So if you are American, you think everything should be standardized, including food, yeah? And that's fine. But you say, gee, and it doesn't work in India. Now, if you are in India, you say, no, it depends on the spices you put in the food, because a chicken is a chicken, but the way you prepare a chicken is quite different, right? And you have curry chicken, and you have tandoori chicken, and you have all kinds of chickens, and it makes the Americans very nervous. Now, if you are in the food industry, the people from India would rather go in terms of, we have all these different local recipes, but how can we have become an international, or at least a pan-Indian company that serves all these different tastes?
Yes.
So our challenge is standardization. In America, it's the opposite. Now, the point I'm trying to make, if diversity and inclusion is based on the fact that we have a diversity of diversity, start with the issue we call a dilemma, and then work with the people on that dilemma, whilst informing them, oh, this is perhaps typically American Indian, or no, this is typically a generational issue. And by the way, if you combine the two, they multiply each other or they buffer each other. But it comes more to the background, because the issue is the foreground, and it should be. Otherwise, people get crazy. And last point in this one, leaders need to take the forefront, because the essence of leadership is to distinguish a problem from a dilemma, because not everything is a dilemma. But if it's a dilemma, which is very likely if you respect the diverse inputs,
true,
then we need to teach them how to reconcile those dilemmas. And that is something that we are now facing, rather than, oh, people from India are different from people from from America.
Absolutely. A very, very detailed explanation, Fons. I think when the whole point of diversity, I think that's something people probably don't understand. And solving an issue, you should always, as you said, start small, target the issue first, find out the dilemma associated with it, and then work on it. And then that's how you solve the larger part of the whole problem, when you start small by one issue at a time. Very, very interesting point. And as you said, diversity has multiple dimensions today.
And Yasmin, perhaps one point to add. The process of dilemma reconciliation is the process from diversity to inclusion.
Exactly.
Because the reconciled solution to a dilemma, for example, in the mass customization, the pizza is a good example, metaphorically. The pizza is international successful because it has a standard bottom, and it has a flexible top.
It does, yes.
Right?
It's customized.
Right? So the diversity is combined with something you combine in the reconciled state. So the reconciled state is inclusive, bringing together the diverse inputs.
Yes.
And that's why it's called mass customization. It's for example, in the car industry, it is, you have the bottom of the car, which is standard, and you build the unique car on top of that. Lego as the toy of the century, at least last century. You see, I'm getting older. Lego has standardized blocks.
Yes, it does.
But the combination of those standardized blocks makes a unique design.
Yes.
And that's what children love, is that combination.
Yes.
And so that is then very inclusive by taking advantage of diversity.
Yes. I think that's the actual solution. I think standardization combined with customization, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
that's going to solve a lot of problems. Thanks, Fons. Thanks for sharing. Fons, you talked a bit about cross-culturalism also, and cross-culturalism at the workplace. The future generation have a different take on how they work, how they upskill themselves, how they look at the entire journey, and their expectations are way different. So, according to you, what are some of the best practices that HR leaders or business leaders should keep in mind when they're looking at redesigning their strategies for this entire back to office wave as we are into right now?
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps I can use the metaphor we just discussed. And that is, how can you combine the careers that are in the head of the individual rather than a career that is offered to you as an individual?
True.
Because when I was working with Shell, I came into Shell and Shell planned your career for you.
True.
The new generation says, I plan my own career and I use companies as intermediate steps. Now, with that in mind, you obviously in HR need to think differently about the world that is coming to you. And namely, how can you facilitate the careers that are in the mind of the individuals and reconcile it with the needs of the organization?
Absolutely, yes.
But the beauty of that is that organizations need to be much more agile.
Yeah.
And perhaps the average lifespan of a individual in a company is from 20 years going back to 2 years. What does that mean for HR? It means different recruitment. I'll come back to that in a second. What is career planning if people on average are there 2 to 5 years? Rather than in Shell, really. They gave you a CEP, a currently estimated potential, which meant that if you are, let's say, 22 as a graduate, you enter Shell, that they give you a potential when you're 50. And the potential was an expression of your level, right? So it assumed that you had a 30-year career at Shell, right? From 20 to 50. And then obviously till 60. But it's interesting that that's unimaginable today.
Yeah.
So what does that mean in terms of giving the meaning to the work of the career that is in the mind of the individual rather than in the mind of the organization? But still, the organization has needs. How can you pick it from the market? And on a political level, in the Netherlands, employees were for very long enormously protected. To fire them was almost impossible.
Yes.
Now that needs to, also in the environment of the organization, facilitated by the government. Mm-hmm. Because the beauty of America is that they fire you easily, but they hire you easily. And that is much more up to date than stick to your job forever in the Netherlands. Now that's all changing, but that is one thing HR managers do. But that also means in how to reward them. So it's about rewards. It's about career planning. Let's go back to recruitment. What we have found lately is that a lot of organizations say, we can very difficultly know what skills we need because, let's take the war in Ukraine and before that the pandemic and before that the financial crisis. The type of skills you need are changing so quickly that the only stability you could offer is your organizational culture.
Yes.
So what a lot of research has shown that young people are attracted to an organization, not because they use their skills, not because the income, obviously they all have an effect, but do I like to work there, right? And we, by the way, developed it was a demand of a large organization that needed a lot of recruited jobs, even up to 300,000. Let me not mention the organization. They needed 300,000 jobs in the coming 5 years. And they said, Fons, our big problem is we can't keep people long enough because there is no value match. The people that we hire don't fit our culture, or we don't fit them. Could you do an app that measures the values of the recruitee, the values of our organization? And I said, yeah, we can. And then you have two spider webs. And if the delta is too big between the two spider webs, we don't hire them. I said, no. What you need to do is a third measurement. How willing and able are the recruitees to reconcile the dilemmas between the values? Because what you need is to enrich your culture with its opposite. So if you say our culture is the quick fix, wouldn't it not be nice to have some people that have a long-term view within which the quick fix gets more meaning? Another example, if you are a technology push company, wouldn't you like to have market pull people? In other words, what they call inner versus outer directed, but not in a way that they negate your culture, but that they integrate your culture so that the technology push is done in the context of the future needs of the market. And we developed that app, and it works very nicely. And it's interesting, that company didn't get our app because they were stuck with other stuff. But now we have 10 other companies who are using it. So it is interesting because that's, I think, the future of HR management, is to think about not only matching in the sense of, is there a little delta between the values of the outsider and the insider? No. How can you reconcile the two so you enrich your corporate culture?
Yes.
And enriching your corporate culture is, how do you integrate opposite ways of thinking?
And that is also, again, about how agile are you as an organization?
It is, I think, a wonderful definition of agility.
Yeah, exactly. That's really, really nice. Thanks, Fons. I think this whole reconciliation of career journey that an individual has and career journey that an organization can plan for them will say a lot about how the future of work will look like. Because as you said, career spans have really come down. So how do you reconcile that? How do you cater to their values and also, ensure that your values are being taken care of as well? So again, we come back to the whole point of how there will be these dilemmas, but how do you reconcile these two? So great points again. Thank you so much, Fons. Time for a final concluding question now. So we have found new allies in tech and innovation in the recent past. And in these couple of years, life and work was totally unimaginable without these. Cultural innovations at the workplace had to be seen through a new lens. So what, according to you, would be the top parameters that leaders should keep in mind while formulating the right equation of culture and innovation, Fons?
We wrote a book, Running the Whirlwind. And by the way, I could make available a fairly long, but not as long as a book, article.
Absolutely.
On how to create a culture of innovation.
Okay.
And let me start with the definition of innovation that comes from my wonderful colleague that you mentioned, Charles Hampden-Turner. Innovation is joining values that are not easily joinable, therefore scarce, therefore profitable. In other words, innovation is combining values that you never thought could be combined. So let's take two examples. Mm-hmm. If you take Apple, which is obviously one of our icons of innovation, mm-hmm. And what in essence have Apple made so successful, and apparently where other organizations and their cultures have problems to do with, and that is aesthetics and functionality. If you take an iPad, now an iPad is in a way beautiful, the shape, but also it doesn't have a frame. It has a glass plate without a frame, which makes it beautiful. But it also has a function, namely you don't break your nails when you swipe it. Okay. Now, everything at an apple that is beautiful has a function. Now, this comes to a deep point, namely, it's not either or, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But it's neither and, because I know companies who try to combine separately, having both aesthetics and functionality, but the two groups don't talk to each other. There is a high-tech group developing high-tech stuff. They throw it over a wall and then, make the outskirts beautiful.
Yeah.
Every engineer in Apple says, yes, it functions, but can we make it beautiful? And every designer says, yes, it's beautiful, but does the beauty have a function? Now that's called through. Through is combining the and. In a way that even beauty has a function. Absolutely. So it's not separate. Another example is Formula One, the race, the fast track racing. Formula One's big dilemma is safety and speed. Now, normally in the car industry, there are two separate divisions. The speed is done by what they call the powertrain division. They make engines faster. And safety is by the safety division. But they don't talk to each other. I'm exaggerating on purpose, right? Every engineer in Formula One says, what can we do with the speed that makes the car more safe? And what can we do with safety that makes the car speedier? So aerodynamics, which is crucial to Formula One, is the reconciliation between speed and safety. Namely, you use the speed to create more downforce, as they call it in jargon, right? Now, that is examples of how to create a mindset that is there to combine opposites, that leads to innovation. Now, there are three ways of doing it. I very often ask in my keynotes to the audience, who of you are using surveys, empirical research, to find out if an individual is creative? And I hardly see any. Yeah, you sometimes see some hands. Now, I've done some empirical research on creativity, and I found that there is an adapter innovator questionnaire by Curtin, Kirton. And it looks at, certain characteristics of a person. For example, it takes elements of Myers-Briggs, MBTI. It takes tortoise mind rather than hare brain. It takes right brain rather than left brain. Those are creative people, right? Whilst non-creative people, more adapters, are the opposite. And I said, how can the most quoted questionnaire, the adapter innovator questionnaire, be based on bipolar thinking? Namely, if you score high on one, you're more creative. And if you score high on its opposite, you're more an adapter. If that questionnaire would have been called invention versus adaptation, it would be great. So we took that questionnaire and we added C and D. Namely, C is how do you use, let's say, tortoise mind for increasing the speed hare brain? And how can you use hare brain to be more the reflective tortoise mind? And what we have found is that the creativity could much better be measured by C and D than by A or B. Okay. A or B was the old bipolar, you're either this or that. While we said, no, it is about combining the two ends. Because the combination of invention with adaptation is innovation. True. Now, I thought that was shameful that the most quoted questionnaire on creativity is not creative itself. Okay, so we have done an alternative. Then you have, second question, the inventive team. Meredith Belbin from Cambridge has shown that the best way to kill the creativity of a team is to put creative people together. He calls them plants, a plant with a lot of flowers, the ideas. No, you need 9 team roles, and one person could cover 3. So if you're very lucky, 3 people is enough to have an innovative team, or if you like, an inventive team. And so we say, have you ever measured the team roles you have in your team? It's easy. Take Belbin, there are other tools, but take Belbin and you find out. However, in every stage of the innovative process, there is a dilemma that pops up in your face. So, for example, in the first stage, which ends up with the prototype, if you like, the minimal viable product.
Yes.
It is the dilemma between the plant coming with an idea and the monitor evaluator, which is another role that is critical on the idea. Now, if you only go for monitor evaluators, they strangle every idea at birth. If you only have creative people, it was shown by Belbin, they kill each other or they end up in the blue sky. All right. So what could you do to combine the monitor evaluator with the creative plant? And that is done by synectics. So an example, if anybody in the team comes up with an idea, you can criticize it under 2 conditions. You first have to start by saying 2 good things about the idea, what you like of the idea, and then formulate your criticism, condition 2. What can I do to help you overcome the lack of budget, to overcome whatever, right?
Yeah.
It has shown in the research, Professor De Bruyne in Belgium, that if you do these kind of interventions, the productivity of a team goes up, the innovation power of a team goes up by 30 to 40%, because you reconcile the creativity. Now, finally, how can you as a leader create a culture of innovation? Now, this is based on the work of Larry Greiner, that there are 4 stages in the development of an organization to make it purely innovative. It starts with an incubator, 2 or 3 people with a great idea, Hewlett Packard, Steve Jobs with this Polish name, Sergey Brin and Larry Page at Google.
Yes.
But they all run into a crisis called the leadership crisis. They're not leaders.
Yeah.
So to solve that, you need to create a family culture, respect for the boss, but by reconciling the dilemmas between the family culture and the incubator culture. Then you get the crisis of autonomy. So you need the guided missile culture, task-oriented, strategic, more focused on the client, with a risk that you become a sweatshop.
True.
Next dilemma is the crisis of control, Eiffel Tower culture, as we call it. In other words, what he's saying, there are developments. You enrich your culture in what we call the stage gate of cultural development, where there are crucial dilemmas that you need to reconcile to create a culture of innovation. Because if you ask Google, is that a task-oriented guided missile? Yes. Is that a family of people who trust and are committed? Yes. Is it a incubator of great ideas? Yes. Is it executive machine, the Eiffel Tower? Yes. They have combined all these subcultures in a developmental process. Now, that's a very long answer to your question. Can you create a culture of innovation?
Yeah.
If I understood the question well, but who cares? It's a nice story.
No, thank you, Fons. Thank you so much. Firstly, the way you gave us the definition of innovation to start with was the most interesting, where you bring together 2 things that you thought could never be brought together. So
Exactly.
Exactly. Like speed and safety are not oxymorons. Aesthetics and functionality are not oxymorons. They can be brought together, and that's what innovation is. And for leaders who can understand of how can you make opposites work together, how can you take, bring the values of each thing together and create a common understanding between them? I think that is what the culture of innovation would stand for, right?
Exactly. By the way, I have noticed, Yasmin, Your summaries are much better than my full answers.
No. I could go on. There's so much to learn from you, Fons. I could keep listening to you forever, but thank you so much. This conversation has been absolutely enriching for me, and I'm sure our audience would agree to that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for these great lessons that you've given us today. We will come back to you with more such interesting conversations in the future as well.
Thank you so much. And if people want to know a bit more about us and the tooling, most of them are free. Go to thtconsulting.com and you will find ways to play, to compare national cultures and gender and see what that means for you. It's a lot of fun to do so.
Lovely. To all our audience members watching this, I would urge you to read more about what Fons has written. Go and check out the resources they have put online, because this is actually a gold mine of knowledge and wisdom. So once again, Fons, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Yasmin. It was a pleasure.
Great. And to all our audience, it was a pleasure hosting all of you. Please stay tuned for the next episode of Transformation Talks. See you all super soon, but do take care of yourselves until then. Thank you and bye-bye.